So today we're going to explore the subjects you see up here. And this is really meant to be an exploration of what we're thinking of as some of the more critical areas to think about as LGBTQ, people who are interested in marketing to the LGBTQ travel segment. And we want to say that questions are welcome. We love the questioning. But please, if you have any questions, it's kind of a little hard to see, but if you do have any questions, just raise your hand and Merryn or I will see you. And even if it's in the middle of something pops into your head, please do ask a question. And we're going to devote a little bit of time at the end, actually, as well. So here in front of you is Merryn Johns, who's like super fabulous, dear friend of mine. I call Merryn the wise woman. I go to her with all sorts of questions and come away and always enlightened, and we always have a really good conversation. So she's beyond the wise woman. She's also a lesbian travel champion. So this is Merryn's world. She's going to tell you all about it. Yay!
So right now we've got Gaycation up there because I'm working with the lovely Tim Rolls and fine-tuning that brand a little bit as I can, but mostly the focus is on Out Voices, which is really an incredible national resource, content creator that has a kind of local foot in different cities in this country and brings some of the best content. It's really cutting edge stuff, I think, right now. It's a bit of a new entity. We're tweaking it, so keep an eye on that. It's outvoices.us is the website.
Awesome. Here's my world, the global LGBTQ travel expert. Right? Nothing less than that. But I did write a book, so I did write a book. And I'm still an inveterate and unapologetic travel writer, and it's something I've been doing since I was really, really young. Traveling and telling people about my trips. So I do it in a slightly more organized way as a writer, and Merryn's one of my editors, God bless her. I've posted a few stories on her sites recently. And I'm also executive director of the Gay Travel Business Network, and DJ's gonna tell us all about that tomorrow, and you can always ask DJ questions, more specific questions. And I have the real privilege and pleasure of teaching undergraduates and graduate students at North NYU, New York University, and also at the University of Texas at Austin, but in their New York City campus, about all sorts of subjects relating to tourism and hospitality. So the zeitgeist is really rapidly evolving with respect to LGBTQ people. Of course, we have same-sex marriage in all 50 states. And I say that and you probably think, oh, duh, right? But it's interesting how people have asked me this question recently. It's like, oh, is marriage legal for gay people in X state? Which I think, wow, okay. So anyway, it's things that are really preoccupy our minds aren't necessarily top of mind for people who are outside of our market. So it's worth saying it. And also in 29 countries now around the world. So the things are really changing. And also, you probably notice in media and conversations, issues around trans, non-binary, and other queer folks in the news. And just the topic of pronouns. Like, I can't tell you how many dinner parties I've been at where people talk about their pronouns now. And it's very interesting, and that has impacts for us in tourism and hospitality. Also, much greater acceptance, but we want to just talk about a little bit about some of the challenges that do remain. And I put the scale up sort of from the mildly annoying to the downright deadly, right? So I think we had a couple of examples today, DJ mentioned, and a couple of other folks. I call it the clueless welcomes at hotels and restaurants, and I'm not faulting the underpaid, overworked, customer-facing staff. I'm faulting the people who don't train them and who don't realize that there's a whole different kind of world out there that doesn't conform with the heteronormative world. So why should we always just expect a opposite-sex couple, only white, only sort of a certain income level, showing up at your restaurant or your hotel or in your plane or in your destination? That's not true anymore. So we all have to kind of realize that, and there are implications for training your customer-facing staff. Unfriendly check-ins, like, oh, you want one bed, like, blah, and check in, move along. And this is prevalent. It actually still happens. Then we kind of slide along the scale down to more annoying and even scary. Lack of bathroom access for people who are gender non-conforming. I mean, we're talking about people who might just not look like what you think someone of that gender should look like. We have a friend, Lindsay, who when she checks, she goes into a bathroom, she's kind of a masculine presenting woman. women in the bathroom will harass her. Why are you in this bathroom? Show me, prove that you're.
She still goes by she. That's her pronoun.
She goes by she.
Yeah.
And she's identifies as a woman, but she just looks gender nonconforming.
It's so interesting because there's a lot of really hyper feminine people that were cisgender women that now go by they. So it's happened almost overnight.
That's interesting.
That this is a discussion we were having like a couple of years ago, like, oh, I don't want to use they as a pronoun because first of all, it's not singular, and now it's like, well, just learn how to use it.
Right.
These issues here, you've got this laundry list. I've been an editor for I've been in the LGBTQ media space for 30 years. These are still all issues. They haven't gone away during that time. So
it's worth reviewing, I would say. So this goes like, we have all these challenges and we have all this acceptance, but we have all these challenges. And so, we can go on and refusal of service actually still happens, and it happens to transgender travelers. In public accommodations, 63% report some form of discrimination, 25% being refused service or removed from premises because people just didn't feel comfortable serving someone who didn't align with what their idea of that gender was supposed to be. So that's terrible, right? And abusive people still exist. There's youth suicide, which is a terrible cancer on our society, and the murder of trans people of color. And why do we, kind of womp womp, right? It's all terrible stuff. But why do we talk about this? Because it's important to know as people who promote tourism into a destination, or people who invite people into their airplane, into their event, into their restaurant, into their hotel. You have to just be aware of the fears and concerns of queer people, which include some of these things listed here. And despite all this, queer travelers lead the way. But don't take our word for it. Take Roger Dow's word for it. So here's a quote, and it was actually for a piece that I wrote, but gays lead and the rest follow. And he goes on to say they're adventurous and they like new experiences and so forth and so forth, and so on. So this just sort of talks a little bit about some of these other key attributes.
Yeah, I'm curious, why do gays travel? I got my passport, I think most queer people I know get it really young. Why? What do we want?
My theory, my pet theory I kind of hinted at a little bit earlier today is that I jokingly say, we're born into the enemy camp, right, for the most part. We're queer people are born into mostly heterosexual environments. And then you kind of realize very early on that you're different, you can't quite identify it, and then you kind of just think, well, maybe I can just meet someone elsewhere. So this idea of travel is inborn. I think it's intrinsic to us as LGBTQ people. And the statistic does show that for passport ownership, 85% of queer people have passports, US in the United States, versus 42%, I think it's 42% of the entire population, mostly straight people. And part of that was because, and 20 years ago, what was the percentage of straight people that had their passport? It's like 20%. Why that big jump was because the passport was required after 9/11 to go to the Caribbean and to go to Mexico, in Canada, which are the three biggest international destinations for US outbound American travelers. It was only because of 9/11 that straight people ended up getting passports, even to the degree of 42%. So some of the characteristics that LGBTQ people exhibit are, despite all the challenges out there, are their resilience around, pandemics, and resilience around economic crises, resilience around abuse. You get up, you dust yourself off, you keep moving forward. I think of us all as like Hillary Clinton. She's resilient, right? That's the sort of model that we have. The loyalty, and you maybe talk about this a little bit with Subaru, right?
With the lesbians, yes. Basically, when I used to run Curve magazine, which was America's newsstand magazine for lesbians, everyone used to ask me, how do we as a destination market to lesbians? How do we reach them? What are we looking for? Isn't there a stereotype that they never spend money, they never want to leave home? And it's all not true. Lesbians just fly under the radar and often are mistaken for other. Are you two sisters, for example?
With privileges.
Yeah. So it's all about measuring them. So what we've become known for, I suppose, is our loyalty, and really an example of this in early advertising days was Subaru, when they first noticed that their going through the roof, and it was all a certain type of customer was buying. It was two women, with wearing plaid with kids and dogs and loving to go out and, get out in nature and stuff. So they decided to actually start marketing to them. But they were quiet consumers, which is often how we are.
And 20, 35 years later, Subaru started this. Lesbians still are one of the biggest buyers of that product. So that tells you a little bit about the loyalty. And we'll just keep moving on because we want to devote a little bit more time to the trends, but to the trends a little bit later on. But I want to say that the queers have a sense of adventure. They're travel trendsetters, and it's like, check out your gay friends' Facebook post. That's where they're traveling now, where you'll be traveling in 18 months. I like to say. Queers, especially gay men, know how to travel during a pandemic, and they know how to mitigate risk to themselves and to others because we've been doing it since the onset of HIV/AIDS crisis. And then, of course, the market size. And I think other talks will get to this point a little bit more, but LGBTQ buying power is estimated to be around $1 trillion with what it comes. And fewer than 25% of queer people include children, right? So it's very small. So dual income, no kids. But as Joe was saying earlier, it's no longer about dual income, no kids, boomer. It's about Henry's high earning, not yet rich. This is not really rich. High earning, not really rich. So it's very interesting. Google that. You'll see some information about that. And then finally, with the power of the invitation, we like to talk about the queer communities have been told no, you can't get married, you can't serve in the military, you can't do this, you can't do that. But when you say yes to a group that has been told no to throughout their entire lives, it's a super powerful thing. And how do you say yes? How do you say yes to this group? It's through content marketing, it's through hospitality training, inclusive training, it's through inclusive content on websites, it's through words, it's through text, images, video, all this kind of stuff. So yes, it's hard to get to that, but you really have to show you have to show you're doing the work. And I'll also say, for hotels and destinations, for queer people, interestingly, this study kind of shocked me, the one at the bottom here. It shows that 85% of LGBTQ people globally aren't out to most of their family and friends. That kind of surprised me because I think everyone we know is so out. But when we're talking about everyone in the world and places that, flyover states in different parts of the world, people aren't out. So that's important to make that invitation specific to people because they're not going to tell you they're queer, but they're going to notice that you're inviting them. Yes. Yes. No, I'm sorry, it's not tourism, it's just the economic power overall for that community. So if I'd said tourism, that was wrong. I meant to say the overall buying power of the community. That number's so fuzzy. You always hear like 65 million. Now it's 100 million, but it's 100 billion rather. I don't know. It's somewhere between 100 billion and trillion, but there's no one who does reliable. CMI stopped doing that a number of years ago. 65 million was at the number that they did. That was many, many years ago. But say 100 billion outbound from North America, take that with a grain of salt. That was the original 65 billion was the 10% of the population. So that tells you how squishy that number was. So anyway, I thought we were going to talk a little bit about the trends. I think this would be interesting in the 16 minutes that remain. Yes. So this is Merryn's a great idea to talk more about trends than any of the specifics. So.
Yeah, I just think a lot has changed in the last decade. I started traveling quite intensely. When was it now? I want to say I really became fascinated with travel back in the early 2000s. And when I think back then, the press trips I would go on, I was often the only woman on the whole press trip, let alone there being a person of colour on that press trip. It was all white men and me. And it's changed so much now. You wouldn't think of having a group like that, would you? You wouldn't even think of doing it. But it was the norm then. So I think the group has changed, which is a reflection of the way the world has changed. And I think just basically acknowledging who is who's out there, who's attached to all of the demographics. And shame that I'm just a white woman saying this, but we're no longer the stand-ins for everybody and the interpreters for everybody. So if you're organising a press group, really think about who you're inviting and that you can't just invite people that look like us to tell the story for everybody else. You have to really be thinking about, are there gender variant people? Are there differently abled people? Not everybody's going to be happy on a gay press trip just going to see a drag show. That's not the paradigm that stands in for queerness anymore.
Right.
And so this first, that's just for our community, but this first idea that the pandemic has really changed the reason we travel, which is the idea of traveling just to consume, just to say that I've had that, I did that, I've been there, and now I feel better. Those days are gone. So again, if you're getting together a product or a press trip, you really need to start looking at what is the message embedded in that itinerary. What is the story of your place that you want the journalists to take away and spread around the world?
Yeah.
And with that, I think is going to be a conscience, going to be a message, and it's going to be more than we just took them to the best restaurant, which we love.
Right.
Don't not do that.
Yes.
But
don't stop doing
maybe it's going to be the best queer-owned, fair trade, vegan, locally sustainable restaurant.
I think you're onto something. We just have to move on, but
Yep.
that's a powerful thought. So Merryn brought this up, and I think this is really powerful as well. Transgender, non-binary, gaining confidence. So the idea that gender non-conforming people, transgender people, like you wouldn't think about the travel story being joyful in the sense that like their identification may not match what they look like, may not match their name on their identification. So they travel with a great deal of challenges. But your point was that they were starting to grow in confidence, and I wanted you to talk about
Well, before they didn't travel, or we didn't know how they traveled, or we didn't know where they were going. And you've got players like Fort Lauderdale coming up now and identifying this group correctly as the next big trend, the next big demographic that comes to the fore and travels with confidence and with certain demands that they want a certain kind of experience. But I do think that they were quite literally in the shadows for such a long time.
Right, and it's fabulous to see this as a trend coming up. Decolonizing travel.
This is the next big trend. This is one I did say to you, please bring it up, especially along lines of people that are much younger than us. Before, we did not really question if we go to an amazing place, Havana, parts of Puerto Rico, we're just looking for the nice beaches and the fancy Instagram moment next to the pink Oldsmobile. We're not thinking about these places as center points of the slave trade, for example, or, sugar farming, or any of these other things that had a terrible human legacy in terms of imperialism. I say, address these points in your press trip. Don't hide them. They're part of the actual destination story, and it's important we tell these stories. And furthermore, the young millennials and influencers, they want to have this story told now.
It's a really great topic. We call it do-it-yourself travel. This is a trend we're seeing more and more just generally in general travel. This is a picture of one of our favorite friends, Alice Santiago. D'Alessandro Santiago, who's an influencer, and maybe talk about her a little bit. She partnered with Fab Stays, and they partnered with a number of destinations, including, I think, Fort Lauderdale. I'm not sure about any of the other destinations represented here, but they did a road trip, and it was all about just planning it yourself and staying in queer-owned sort of Airbnb properties, rental cars, and so forth and so on. And how do you tap into that if you're a destination? You're already thinking about this in the sort of the mainstream world, but it also happens with queer-specific travelers who are also wanting to make sure they're going to be safe, that they're going to go someplace that will warmly welcome them, hence partnering.
And body variance. So there are people who are, super plus size. There are, new kinds of people who we haven't talked about really until recently, such as trans men who become bears, who become part of the bear community and, might want to go camping, and they might want to do it in your woods. Well, what do you have for them?
Right.
So I know some women that were once lesbians who then became transgender men and now identify as bears in a gay relationship.
Fabulous.
So that whole arc of identity now has its own expression in their lifestyle as well. And you're not going to think those people just never leave their homes.
Right.
They're going to go on a vacation.
Right.
Where are they going to go? How are they going to do it? So with this group, I'm noticing there's a lot more do-it-yourself travel because they want it to look like how they feel.
Accessible travel.
Yes, I think the other big growth area is going to be, again, identifying what you've got to offer differently abled people. And I think that that looks like many different things. And I think, especially age as well, it's going to be, once again, you're not going to have people just say, oh, I'm not meeting the picture postcard image of a traveller, therefore I'm not going to go anywhere anymore. It's not going to happen.
This, I think, Merryn's touched on this a little bit more. The couple, the two friends on the left are obviously plus size and proud and travel and represent quite a huge number of followers, I think, combined. I think Elise has, I want to say, in the hundreds of thousands of followers. And she understands how to motivate and engage her readership. And it's an interesting group that people don't really think about. I think when you're thinking about inviting or partnering with influencers, certain influencers come to mind, but there's a whole world out there of very diverse travel-focused influencers. And the folks on the right is, I want to say he calls himself Gay Asian Maple Leaf or Asian Maple Leaf or something like that. He's a Canadian from Toronto, and his partner is the African-American gentleman on the our left, who is from New York, and they travel. I think this might be Puerto Rico. I'm not 100% certain where this was taken, but they've partnered with Puerto Rico, and they're really some really great influencers that are out there that are diverse and that themselves have a lot of followers. And what you find is people really like to feel included and invited, and they feel included and invited when they can see themselves authentically in a destination. Oh, this is what I talked about a little bit earlier. Pride is an important day, month, or season of visibility and celebration of acceptance and celebration of a culture that has been created, and it's fabulous. And I would say Pride is really for queer people and their allies to just have a good time and enjoy themselves and just mark another year of challenges and successes and all this kind of stuff. And it's fun and it's great. The support of corporate support and institutional support and governmental support is awesome and terrific, but the support should be about the queer people and their enjoyment of this thing. I think marketing around it is just, maybe it'll work for you, maybe not. I just think it's not something that has to be in everyone's toolbox. It is a tactic and not a strategy.
And it's a holiday. It's a moment where certain values for our community become crystallized. You wouldn't expect it to be Hanukkah all year. You wouldn't expect it to be New Year's Eve all year. So if you're straight and you don't quite know what Pride is, it's really just that moment. It's that moment we choose, as you would with any holiday, to bring the values that pertain to your group to the fore in a very obvious way. But it's not the only time of year you should acknowledge our community. No.
In fact, you may have more success the other 11 months of the year, the other 364 days of the year to get the attention of folks who are otherwise just busy being gay. And then Merryn's mentioned this a few more times, the idea of meaningful press trips, and what does that mean? The idea of including the untold history, the untold story in your destinations. When you're bringing, I remember one of the first queer press trips I went on, they brought us to the Hamburger Marrieds, and I thought, well, that's the one place I don't need you to tell me where to go, right? We know the Hamburger Marriage is a gay hamburger joint. It's not that interesting for us to see.
What if it's all they've got? I mean, it's hard, isn't it?
Right.
I would say this as a journalist, if that's who you're inviting, your journalists and your influencers, whatever itinerary you create is the structure for the story they're going to tell about your destination or your property. So embedded in that itinerary needs to be the message, the DNA of the message you hope they're going to take out to the world. That's what I'm a bit of a narrative junkie, but that's what I would say. You have an opportunity there, not just a duty to show off the best of your destination, but you've got an opportunity to embed in the trip the DNA of what you want them to go and spread. So
super smart.
I have a question though.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's changed though, because now you have gay or lesbian chefs that are coming to the forefront, or even black-owned businesses that are coming to the forefront?
Totally.
And you can build upon that with your travel itinerary. There doesn't necessarily have to be a gay establishment, but somebody that identifies as queer as a business owner.
I think so, yeah. And I think that actually, to Merryn's point, it actually makes a good angle for a potential story, too. So if you're inviting your group to a place where there's a well-known chef who's queer, I mean, Puerto Rico did this for us for a press trip where we went to this, this woman who was actually was a transgender man chef, and he was fantastic and just known for cocktails and known for a great restaurant, and it was a good story for any audience, queer or non-queer audience. But for the queer travel writers, it had that additional hook of, oh, this is a cool place that's helmed by a transgender man. So that made it slightly more, as a journalist, is a nice little hook into the story for the reader. So yeah, 100% agree. And I think it doesn't take that much research and effort to find those places in a destination. I would say every destination has those, I would think, especially nowadays.
And there's always local politics, and I know that too with a smaller destination. Often you're dealing with local politics, but still, I mean, this is such an important one. I mean, I'm so old that I can tell you that most of the ads that used to appeal to the LGBT community had two white guys in red Speedos. And I'd often have people say, but don't you know you can read between the lines? You're welcome to. And I'd say, but I'm not welcome to, am I? Because, I don't see the message, I don't see the invitation for me. And just so with a lesbian product, I just put a bunch of, skinny white girls in the ad, and I go, well, black women should know they're welcome. They should just, magically project themselves into the invitation. Well, they're not going to. They're going to see a whole bunch of people who are potentially racist and don't want them there. Right. So you can never be too obvious in the invitation. Yes.
And the follow through too. So the idea is you invite them, you use some inclusive imagery, hopefully in wording and intentional, purposeful, and meaningful. But then you get folks who come to you, two queer people who come to your front desk, and then the person is untrained and has no idea how to respond to this. And so then there's an opportunity that's missed for them to engage with this new type of customer, and it's squandered because there's absolutely no training around that. So I know, for example, Miami does this inclusive hospitality. They do videos, and partners are encouraged to look at the videos and understand, oh, okay, two people who look like these two fabulous women show up at the desk, fabulous people who show up at the desk, they're just trained to kind of lean into it and say, oh, hi, welcome, let me reconfirm what's here, are you celebrating anything special? Let me just treat you like I treat everyone else. So then there's not a surprise element, right? So I think the idea of inclusive hospitality that I'm trying to boil down to the small amount of time that we have left is understand the needs, concerns, and behaviors of all the different type of people that hopefully you're inviting, who are just a little bit maybe non-normative, who don't look like everyone else who's already come through your hotel, through your destination before. And that's it. Oh my God, good timing, actually.
What, 2 minutes left?
We have 2 minutes left. We have the Q&A, queer questions welcome. That's what that means. So if anybody has any queer questions, or any questions whatsoever? Yes. Of course DJ has questions. We love DJ with his questions.
So you mentioned the burgeoning trend of transgender and non-binary traveling. Has anybody done any sort of study to determine what the size of that market is, what the economic impact is into queer travel, and what brands or agencies are doing or setting themselves up to get an adequate ROI for spending marketing dollars to reach that?
Yeah. Actually, Fort Lauderdale has done a lot of work with that, and in partnership with CMI, and you can actually download the CMI research that they've done. I think the economic impact, I'm not sure about that specifically, whether they've measured that, but they do talk about behaviors, needs, concerns, all this. And Fort Lauderdale has kind of responded to that in a very big way, and they have had conferences, so they can talk about the ROI for those conferences that they've hosted there, because there's real dollars associated with the in terms of the hotel rooms and the Lyfts and Ubers and restaurants and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, but I would look to Fort Lauderdale, and on their website they include a lot of that information. They're very transparent at what they do in Fort Lauderdale.
And I'd just like to add that it's very tempting for us to look at the transgender or gender non-conforming community and try to read and measure them as a monolith, but they're not. And they're just like us, a floating demographic that is going to seek out the best deal, the best destination where they feel safe. Lesbians like to go to Rehoboth Beach. There's a absolute tradition of going out there and having summer places, little different parts of Florida. We're minorities that have traveled and sought out places that welcome us back, accept us, and transgender people are going to be no different. So it's not surprising to me that Fort Lauderdale has a success story here, because they've actually done the work. They've done the outreach.
Right.
And they've made sure they've had a good time, they've welcomed them,
Right.
they've made them feel safe, because of course transgender people require safety.
So definitely check out the work that Fort Lauderdale's done. I think that's it for time, unfortunately. Do we have time for another question? Yes, okay, we'll do it.
The only thing that I'm kind of coming up with a little bit, my sister and her wife, they love to come to my destination. They love to come to Key West on vacation, and and I've been really trying to push marketing in the women. Like it's one thing to say to a corporation, listen, we need to make sure that when the person comes in, that they're welcome. If there are two women that are coming in, that they're welcome, they don't feel out of place. But the place that I feel like gets overlooked a lot is that everybody focuses on the hotels and the industry, and no one focuses on the attitudes of gay men. Because I gotta say that most of the opposition that I find to women travelers comes from gay men in the community that no one's talking about trying to change their attitude. Look, it's like you were saying earlier, as I'm trying to push, women's events, what the blowback I get from gay men is, oh, they don't spend any money. Oh, the stuff that we heard from 30 years ago.
Right.
So I think in my destination, I know that one thing that, as a gay man, I know that gay men have always, like as a young gay man, I used to go into gay and lesbian bookstores and say, where's the lesbian section? They're like, oh, in the back room on the bottom 2 shelves. Well, we're not really much of a gay lesbian bookstore, are we?
Right.
Well, so a couple of really, we've got no time, but there's 2 things here that have really affected this. One is that men don't want women around when they're trying to have sex on premises and clothing optional. It's as simple as that. Gay men often factor in sex with their travel and their leisure, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's often not compatible with 2 women on a romantic, want to be in a I'm thinking of a nice guest house in Key West, when so many of those establishments are about clothing optional and men only. So that's one thing, it's just our differences there. And then the other thing is women earn, or have historically earned, 20% less than men, and they usually have dependents, whether it's aging parents or children. So they've had less discretionary income than men, which is not to say they don't spend money, they just spend money in a different way, not with the kind of carefree abandon that a lot of gay guys do. Because a lot of guys do. Any straight woman will tell you, oh my God, I have to get my husband to just hand me over his paycheck so we'd have a roof over our head, still. So a lot of it is the fact that we are still dealing with men versus women. And then the sweet spot of when they can be together is often when they are, frankly, middle-aged. And as one of my friends who was a guy said, I'm too old to care about taking my shirt off anymore. I just want to sit and have a drink with the lesbians, So, anyway.
It's been nice to have that conversation also within our own community. We have to change our consciousness.
Right.
Or be aware of it. And that as we age and we're in different stages of our lives, we want different things, perhaps.
Can I ask one more question to Merryn specifically? Merryn, what do you think is the role of LGBT media from a content perspective to affect the attitudes within the travel community, even from a branding perspective, to sort of say, hey, we are showing representation on our websites, in our social media, on our printed pages that include everybody. In your opinion, instead of having that segregated viewpoint where like you have a gay magazine, a lesbian magazine, a trans magazine, and everything else, if outvoices.us is about us, all of us, what are you as the director of content doing to make sure that all of us in that coalition are represented?
Try to pick the best stories and the best news that reflect us in our diversity. I do think we can all coexist. And I think that the more we're accepted, the less pressure will be on our sexual preferences, our sexual orientation, and those parts of ourselves that have often been taboo, and we've had to find secretive and segregated ways of expressing them. It's a part of the mainstreaming of our culture, but it's also necessary that we all are able to exist publicly and coexist. We have to. We have to all stop being segregated and living in the shadows and not understanding each other. So I can do a content mix that reflects that with pride, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have read